Kiwi Forever. In one of your recent videos, I think it was one with the ex-Mormon guy, you mentioned that around 75% of people on the RPF end up leaving. My question is, how do they leave? Do they blow, or do they simply go up to someone in authority and say, I've had enough, I want to leave? I'm curious about how simple this process is. What effort does Scientology put into stopping people from leaving? Legally, they can't stop you from leaving, but I'm sure they will use all kinds of threats to get you to stay. If you leave the RPF, are you out of the Sea Org/Scientology for good? Are you automatically declared and disconnected? Finally, how do you physically leave? As I understand it, the RPF is in the middle of nowhere. Does RPF management give you a lift back into town? Can you call someone to come and get you? Or are you left up to your own devices? Okay, RPF. Videos and videos and videos worth of content just talking and breaking down the RPF. Big topic. And yes, I do still intend on eventually writing that book about it, and I've got tons of notes and stuff on that. But in the meantime, I will answer questions like this because I thought that this would be useful and important to clarify a few things for you, Beth, and maybe the viewership out there. First off, the RPF is not located in the middle of nowhere. That's not how the RPF works. The RPF is always on a Sea Org base. Always. In fact, almost all of your time on the RPF is on that base. Only if you are bussed somewhere for a special project or action, like, for example, setting up for a New Year's event at the Shrine Auditorium. We get bussed out there, and then you get bussed back to the base, and that's where you live, that's where you sleep, that's where you eat. So it's not out in the middle of nowhere, and maybe that's a confusion between what the RPF is and the whole, which they've talked about ad nauseum in media. That is David Miscavige's special project that he set up at the base in San Jacinto, California, and that's where they got the razor wire and all that stuff, and they've this is called the Gold Base or the International Base or the International Gold Base. And that's where they have these beautiful properties, and it's way out in San Jacinto. There is no RPF there. There used to be up until the very early 2000s, or the year 2000 maybe, just a bit after that, and they moved that whole RPF to Los Angeles, where the big blue buildings are, and that's where I worked, and that's where I did my RPF. And I was on the RPF, I think it was 2004 to 2008 time period. And it was about 3 years, 3 months, something like that in that time period. And I spent my entire time on the base. That's where you're sequestered. The RPF is a sequestered activity. All the people who are on the RPF are located together. They sleep dorms together. There's a woman's dorm and a men's dorm. There's no married couples on the RPF. Even if you're married and you go to the RPF with your wife, you guys are not acting like man and wife when you're on the RPF. There is no kissing. There's no connecting. There's no none of that. You literally have to treat each other as though you're just fellow Sea Org members. Of course, that doesn't happen. But, they're not sleeping together. They're not having sex. They're not acting like publicly there is no married couple activity there. Okay, getting a little into the minutia, let's get to your question, which is how do you leave? The RPF is left just like the Sea Org is left. You go and say, I want to leave. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to do this. And then they'll sit you down and get, okay, what's going on, why, they write it all down, give you an interview. They might just tell you to shut the fuck up and carry on, right? I mean, that you'll get that kind of treatment for a little while, or you could. There's so many variables to this. It's not like every single person's had a uniform, similar experience. So it's always a little hard to talk about this. I have to talk in broad strokes a bit. But there will be an effort, almost uniformly, there will be an effort to try to talk you out of it. That'll come from the RPF in charge, who is not somebody who is doing the RPF. He's a Sea Org member who is in charge of the RPF. That's his post. That's his job. And so he'll oversee everything going on with the RPF. And he does not direct every single RPFer on every single thing they do. He's overall in charge of the program. The RPF has a sort of a leadership structure that has a bosun and a deputy bosun, and there's a half over here and half over there, and there's a whole hierarchy and stuff to it. And when you first get in there, you got to start moving up the ladder. So the RPFIC as a person, right, is right in charge of the RPF bosun, and that's usually the person he's coordinating with. But if somebody comes up as wanting to leave, well, RPFers might try to talk that person out of it, but ultimately the RPFIC is going to be the one who's going to be having talks with him. Because of Sea Org policy, Sea Org members who are on the RPF can't talk to or originate communication with people outside the RPF, just the RPFIC. So it's not like the person's, so it might be actually that if the person's married, the spouse might come over and coordinate with the RPFIC and they might talk. They're going to have to one way or the other, because if the person leaves, he's going to be getting, and he or she will be divorcing their spouse if they're married. So those conversations will have to happen, and those will probably be encouragements to stay, stick it out, get through it. Come on, be a Sea Org member, be tough, that kind of thing. We're clearing the planet, rah, rah, rah. Beyond the talking the person out of it process, the next step is, like every Sea Org member or Scientology staff member who asks to leave, they're going to get sec checked, a security check, and that's going to be done by their twin on the RPF. When you do the RPF, you work with another RPFer. Your job is to make them better. Their job is to make you better. So when you're on the RPF, it's not about you getting better. It's about you making somebody else better. You got to prove you can actually help somebody else. That's the rehabilitation point of the RPF. So you get rehabilitated, but the real point of it is for you to help somebody else out. Okay, so your sec check's going to happen. So your twin or somebody on the RPF, if you don't have a twin for some reason, is going to sec check you, and they're going to give you a series of questions that you're going to have to pass on the e-meter. And you're going to have to get off all your crimes, all the horrible, awful things you've been up to, because Hubbard said that you cannot leave, you would not want to leave if you had not done bad things. So, in other words, committed overts is what they call it, right? They've done bad things. So you got sec checked and you get all cleaned up on that. And if you still want to leave, because some people change their mind during that process. I did, not on the RPF, but earlier in my Scientology staff career, I was wanting to leave back in Santa Barbara, and I got a sec check, and I changed my mind. So that happens, right? But if they still persist and they want to go, and they finish the sec check, and it's all over, good. Then there's the paperwork and non-disclosure agreements and contracts, and they have to figure out where the guy's going to go, and who's he going to live with, or is he going to have where's he going to work? All this. This has been given no attention. This has been given a lot of attention. It's depended on the time period. Sometimes people are just kicked out on the street. Other times people have been groomed and taken care of, and like, okay, let's get you a job. And with a Scientologist, of course, got to keep the person in the community and keep them under control, right? So when you leave the RPF or you leave the Sea Org, you are not automatically declared a suppressive person. You're not automatically disconnected, at least in theory. Okay, I mean, when I left, they were disconnecting me right away and telling me I couldn't talk to people, couldn't have Facebook friends, couldn't do this, couldn't do that. It didn't make any sense to me. So they will run stuff on you, for sure, they will. But that's more of a cultural thing than a policy point, if I can make that difference, and if that's easy to understand, because I don't want to try to belabor that. But it's not because L. Ron Hubbard said you're to be disconnected. It's because the Sea Org culture kind of demands it, because they're a tight-knit group of people who very, very, very much resent people who leave, right? They think that those people are scum of the earth. And Hubbard himself did say that if you leave the Sea Org, you are a quote-unquote degraded being, a DB. And this is a slang term in Scientology, a derogatory term, way lower than a WOG. In Scientologies, the term WOG just means somebody who's not a Scientologist. A degraded being is a scumbag. And a suppressive person is an evil scumbag. A degraded being is not necessarily evil. He's just so screwed up, he can't even, figure out his way out of a wet paper bag. A suppressive person is an evil sumbitch who's trying to destroy the world, and you along with it. So that's the difference there in the mind of the Scientologist. So when you leave, no, there's no official declare, unless, okay, again, I mentioned I have to talk in these broad strokes because there's all these conditionals, right? Some people get sent to the RPF, and the choice they're given is you're going to do the RPF or we're going to declare you a suppressive person because you screwed up so bad and we are so pissed at you that that's where you've gotten yourself. So now it's one or the other. Are you going to get declared or are you going to do the RPF, right? And that's when you're stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea as a Scientologist. You're screwed either way. And some people opt for the declare, some people opt for the RPF program. And I that was not the position I was in, but I definitely saw people in that position. And so for them, if you say, yeah, I'll go do the RPF program, don't declare me, and then you get 6 months in and you go, okay, well, this is just definitely not for me. Well, if they leave, they're getting declared. Okay. Now you said, how do they physically leave? Okay. They walk out. There are ways you can get out. There's always a way. I mean, it's prison break kind of stuff. You got to figure out where the security guards are, and you got to figure out where the cameras are, and you work it out. Or you blow. This happened more often is you would go out on a trip with somebody, like to the hospital, or because somebody needed something that something had to get purchased at a store for some reason. Very, very rare. More often hospital trips because RPFers are getting hurt all the time. So if you get hurt, let's say, if you get hurt, you got to go to the hospital, but you can't go alone. So 2 people have to escort you. So it's a 3-person deal. When RPFers go off the base, they always go in groups of 3, and this is so they keep eyes on each other. But you can go off to the bathroom and disappear, and you'd be gone, right? And you could do that at the hospital. You could do that on the way to the hospital on a bus or something. So whatever, yeah, however you'd want to work that out. That is one way people could physically leave. The RPF, you mentioned it's in the middle of nowhere. We already clarified it's not. And can you call someone to come and get you? No, that's not how that works. When you leave the RPF through the official channels, your entire, where you're going to go, how you're going to get there, you're going to get a $500 severance pay or some kind of severance pay. I believe it was $500. I think it still is. That's gone up and down. But if you officially leave, every Sea Org member is supposed to get that severance pay and some kind of setup through security as to where you're going to work, where you're going to live, because they don't want you ending up on the streets and being bad PR for them. It's not that they care about you at all. They just don't want the bad PR because they kicked people out on the street, and then the news media got hold of that, and and then it was bad. So that's basically it. That's the RPF in a nutshell, and I hope that gave you some good information and answered your questions.